Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here, and today we actually have to talk about voting machines here in the United States in the lead up to the 2022 midterm elections that are just a handful of months away at this point because voting software is vulnerable in at least 16 states. Now, we are basically going to cut through red tape. I'm cribbing off the AP here, who had just a fantastic article on this, but it's very important to separate fact from fiction in these situations. And so with that, let's start with this AP article because I'm going to be paraphrasing it or quoting it directly quite a bit because I think they did a good job. And here's what's going on. Electronic voting machines from a leading vendor used in at least 16 states has software vulnerabilities that leave them susceptible to hacking if unaddressed. And that is according to the CISA, or the United States Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, essentially in a report as they sent this advisory to state election officials. Now, CISA said there is no evidence the flaws in these Dominion voting systems have been exploited to alter election results. I cannot stress that enough in the sense that I have seen zero evidence, as I, as a cybersecurity professional and expert in these kinds of things, have not seen anything that I can see as tangible or credible evidence. I will be the first one to tell you here on this podcast/video and also on my nationally syndicated radio show if I ever do, and I will stand by that. I have yet to see any evidence of that. Now, I digress. Let's continue. The advisory is based on testing by a prominent computer scientist, we'll get to him, and an expert witness. He's also an expert witness in a long-running lawsuit that is unrelated to these false allegations of a stolen election that had been pushed by President Trump and his supporters. I cannot stress that enough. I have zero evidence to say that any of these allegations that I have seen, one, have held up in court, or two, have been produced by any outlet or anybody that I can forensically review. And Lord knows I've asked for that. Now, to continue, the advisory obtained by the Associated Press in advance of its expected release this Friday details 9 vulnerabilities and suggests protective measures to prevent or detect their exploitation. Now, amid a swirl of obvious information and disinformation about elections, I've talked about that at length, CISA seems to be trying to basically walk the line between not alarming the public and stressing the need for election officials to take action. It's one of the reasons I wanted to do this as soon as I heard this news, in part because as soon as this hits and basically starts to circulate in certain circles, it's going to explode to say, aha, this is proof that the election was hacked. That is not what they are saying. Now, CISA's executive director, Brandon Wales, said in a statement that, quote, states' standard election security procedures would detect exploitation of these vulnerabilities and in many cases would prevent attempts entirely. Yet, the advisory seems to suggest that states aren't doing enough as well. It urges prompt mitigation measures, including both continued and enhanced, quote, defensive measures to reduce the risk of exploitation of these vulnerabilities. Now, these measures need to be applied ahead of every election, according to the advisory, and it's clear that's not happening in all of the states that are using these specific machines. Now, the individual that we're talking about that authored this is a University of Michigan computer scientist known as J. Alex Halderman, and he wrote the report on which this advisory is based and has long argued that using digital technology to record votes is dangerous because computers are inherently vulnerable to hacking and thus require multiple safeguards that aren't uniformly followed. I agree with that statement and his assertion. He and many other election security experts have insisted that using hand-marked paper ballots is the most secure method of voting and the only option that allows for meaningful post-election audits. Again, I agree with that. I do not think we should be using computerized voting systems here in the United States or anywhere else in the world. Quote, these vulnerabilities, for the most part, are not ones that could be easily exploited by someone who walks in off the street, but they are things we should worry could be exploited by sophisticated attackers, such as hostile nation states or by election insiders, and they would carry very serious consequences. That was Professor Halderman talking to the Associated Press. Now, the potential for meddling by basically election insiders was actually illustrated recently by Mesa County Clerk Tina Peters in Colorado, who basically has become a hero to election conspiracy theorists. I actually was watching Mike Lindell's cyber symposium, quote unquote, live when that news hit, and she had to leave because they basically had a warrant out for her arrest, if I recall. But I remember basically them shutting down their quote unquote audit of a live server from Dominion at that symposium. Again, I got zero evidence from that symposium, as did other cybersecurity experts that watched it. Now, data from her county's voting machines appeared on election conspiracy websites last summer, shortly after Ms. Peter appeared at that symposium. Basically, that was organized by MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell. She's been indicted and recently barred from running for Secretary of State in Colorado. And like I said, I actually witnessed that live. I watched that whole thing so you didn't have to, and live tweeted it. You can literally go see my analysis live as it was going on. Now, Professor Halderman also found that an attacker with physical or network access could gain control of the voting machines and install malicious code that could alter results. That includes accessing the election management system to modify files before they're uploaded to voting machines, or forging cards that are used by technicians, voters, and poll workers to gain unauthorized access to these machines. Now, Professor Halderman is an expert witness for the plaintiffs in a lawsuit originally filed in 2017 that targeted the outdating voting machines that Georgia, the state of Georgia, was using at that time. Now, the state bought the Dominion system in 2019, but the plaintiffs contend that the new system is also insecure. Now, the 25,000-word report detailing Halderman's findings was filed under seal in federal court in Atlanta last July. Now, U.S. District Judge Amy Totenberg, who's overseeing the case, I've been following this as well, has expressed concern about releasing the report, worrying about the potential for hacking and misuse of sensitive election system information. The short answer is yes. This report, detailing essentially how all the doors and windows are potentially unlocked, is not something you want to get out into the public because it can be exploited. The only time that should be released is when the voting systems, one, have released an update to fix those vulnerabilities, and two, we have confirmation that all of those voting machines have in fact been updated to fix those vulnerabilities. Then we can release those reports. Now, Judge Totenberg also agreed in February that the report could be shared with the CSA, which promised to work with Halderman and Dominion to analyze the potential vulnerabilities and then help jurisdictions that use the machines to test and apply any protections. That is the appropriate decision by that judge. Now, Professor Halderman agrees there is zero evidence that vulnerabilities were exploited in the 2020 election. I will say that again. Halderman, and I quote the AP directly, Halderman agrees that there's no evidence the vulnerabilities were exploited in the 2020 election. But that wasn't his mission, according to him. He was looking for ways that basically Dominion's Democracy Suite ImageCast X voting system could be compromised, meaning he was looking, as we do in penetration testing, for all possible vulnerabilities to essentially give Dominion an understanding of just how vulnerable or not vulnerable their systems are. Now, the touchscreen voting machines can be configured as ballot marking devices that produce a paper ballot or record votes electronically. Now, Halderman said that it's quote-unquote unfortunate coincidence that the first vulnerabilities in the polling place equipment reported to CSA affected Dominion machines. Quote, there are systemic problems with the way election equipment is developed, tested, and certified, and I think it's more likely than not that serious problems would be found in equipment from other vendors if they were subjected to the same kind of testing, and that is according, end quote, that's according to Professor Halderman, and that is true. I remember talking about this a few years ago with another voting system that's a competitor of Dominion known as ES&S that basically was working with the CSA to fix vulnerabilities in their electronic systems as well. So this is not uniquely a Dominion problem. Now, the CSA Advisory specifically advises against using the machines as they are configured in Georgia, where a printed paper ballot includes both a barcode and a human-readable list reflecting the voter's selections, and votes are tallied by a scanner that reads the barcode. Quote, when barcodes are used to tabulate votes, they may be subject to attacks exploiting the listed vulnerabilities such that the barcode is inconsistent with the human readable portion of the paper ballot. That is according to the advisory. The advisory recommends that the voting machines should be configured, if possible, to produce, quote, traditional full-face ballots rather than summary ballots that use a barcode. Now, the affected machines are used by at least some voters in at least 16 states here across the nation, and in most of those places, they are used only for people who can't physically fill out a ballot by hand, according to a voting equipment tracker maintained by the watchdog Verified Voting, meaning this is vastly mitigated in the sense that if you can't fill out that paper ballot by hand, then you use the electronic machine. Some people have disabilities, that would make sense. But in some states, including Georgia, almost all in-person voting is on these types of infected machines. So affected, not infected. Now, Georgia's Deputy Secretary of State, Gabriel Sterling, said the CSA Advisory and a separate report commissioned by Dominion recognized that, quote, existing procedural safeguards make it extremely unlikely, end quote, that a bad actor could exploit the vulnerabilities identified by Halderman. He called Halderman's claims exaggerated, quote unquote. Now, Dominion has told CSA that the vulnerabilities have been addressed in subsequent software versions, and the advisory says election officials should contact the company to determine which updates they need. Halderman tested machines used in Georgia, and he said it's not clear whether the machines were running other versions of the software that share those same vulnerabilities. Halderman also said that as far as he knows, quote, no one but Dominion has had the opportunity to test their asserted fixes. Now, to prevent or detect the exploitation of these vulnerabilities, the advisory recommendations include things like ensuring voting machines are secured and protected at all times. That's physical security, as it should be, so nobody can tamper with it. Conducting rigorous pre- and post-election testing on the machines, as well as post-election audits. Again, I agree, and encouraging voters to verify the human-readable portion of their printed ballot, meaning it's a shared responsibility. Look at your piece of paper that you have as a receipt, keep that receipt, and also it should basically reflect who you voted for and nobody else. And obviously, if there's a problem, you need to talk to an election official. But I want to stress this in a couple of different ways. One, I'm sure I'm going to get hate mail on this. Oh my God, Nick, it was totally stolen. You're an idiot, blah, 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 blah. Show me actual verifiable evidence. I've been asking for that for years. I have not seen this. Also, hacking an election in a confederated election system, and I wrote an article about this after the 2016 election, is virtually impossible. You would have to send an absolute army of operatives into all of these voting places to physically tamper with a lot of these machines, as overwhelmingly they are not online. And when they are found to be online, oftentimes they are taken offline. Again, we have no evidence that any vulnerability that we know of right now has actually been tampered or exploited with, or exploited by a hostile foreign government or an insider, with the exception of Tina Peters, basically who had a friend or an associate steal a copy of a Dominion voting machine and put it out there, thus making the entire voting system on Dominion much more insecure. This is a person that believes Mike Lindell, and she made our voting system more insecure than what all of the experts are saying. I want this kind of evidence if it's there. I directly attempted to contact Mike Lindell to basically say, show me the evidence. I'm happy to review it for free. I'll do it completely transparently. You know, there it is. I watched the Cyber Symposium. I saw demonstrations of packet captures, but a demonstration is not an actual attempt. I can leave my car windows down and my doors unlocked in my car all night. That doesn't mean somebody opened a door and stole something from my car. This is what we have to understand. Vulnerability does not equate with a successful hacking attempt. And we have no evidence of that. And I know there are going to be people out there that think I'm an idiot, but I need verifiable proof. I need something that I can basically verify as chain of custody and take into court as an expert and testify, and I would. I absolutely would. I think everybody wants a secure election. If there's actual tangible evidence that comes out, I'm happy to change my tone, but I have not seen anything at all that gives me any indication that this was anything but an honest election. Meaning, even though there were vulnerabilities, even though the car doors were unlocked, nobody hostile got into the car and did anything bad. We have no evidence of that. That's all I'm saying here. And once I have evidence, I am happy to change my tone. I'm not sitting or resting on my laurels here. This isn't a political motivation. This is purely a cybersecurity expert wanting the actual evidence to make an informed and honest opinion. So that's my rant. That's what's going on. Please understand that even though we have vulnerabilities, and probably the computer or phone that you are literally watching me on has vulnerabilities as well, it doesn't mean you've been hacked. That is an important distinction to make. Show me the evidence, show me the verifiable evidence. There you go. So that is your news of the day. We really need to make sure that these are secure, but overall, at the end of the day, we really need to go back to verifiable paper ballots. It is the safest thing we can do. This is a computer nerd / cybersecurity expert telling you we shouldn't be using electronic voting, and most of us in my field agree. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everyone.